It was a normal afternoon in the city. The streets were busy, full of people walking, shopping, and talking. Cars moved slowly through traffic, and the sound of horns and voices filled the air. In the middle of this busy place, an old lady walked alone. She wore a long, faded coat and held a small bag close to her chest. Her white hair was tied back, and her face looked tired but peaceful. Her name was Maria Thomas, but no one knew that yet. She looked like just another poor, lonely woman. Maria moved slowly. Her back was a little bent, and she walked with care. She stopped outside a small bakery and looked through the window. Children were eating sweets inside. She smiled softly, then walked on. Suddenly, a loud voice broke the air. "Hey! You! Stop right there!" People turned to look. A tall young police officer was walking quickly toward Maria. His name was Officer Rick. Maria turned around, confused. Her eyes showed no fear, just surprise. "Yes, you!" Officer Rick shouted again. "Show me what's in your bag." Maria looked at the bag in her hands. "It's just some bread," she said in a weak voice. "Don't lie to me!" the officer yelled. He grabbed her bag and threw it to the ground. A piece of bread rolled out, along with a small notebook. The pages opened in the wind. Officer Rick didn't care. He pushed Maria back roughly. "Why are you pushing her?" Someone in the crowd shouted, but no one moved forward. People only watched. Some took out their phones and started recording. Maria tried to stay standing. Her hands were shaking. "I didn't do anything," she said, almost whispering. Officer Rick's eyes were full of anger. "I've seen you before. You've been hiding something." He grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her again. This time, she fell to the ground. Gasps came from the crowd. "She's just an old lady," someone said. "Stop it!" But the officer didn't stop. He pulled her up roughly. Her coat tore at the shoulder. Her bag lay open on the road. "Tell me who you really are," he shouted. Maria looked him in the eyes. There was pain in her face, but also something else. "Strength. You don't know who I am," she said quietly. "But you will." Her voice was soft, but her words were strong. The officer froze for a moment. "What did you say?" he asked, confused. Maria didn't answer. She just looked at him with tired eyes. At that moment, a police car arrived. Another officer ran out and pulled Officer Rick back. "What are you doing?" the second officer asked. "She's just an old woman." "She's hiding something," Rick said. "I know her face. I've seen her in old files." Maria was still on the ground, her knees scraped, her hands shaking. The second officer helped her stand. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Maria nodded slowly. "I'm fine." Rick looked angry and confused. He pointed at her. "She's not innocent. I know there's something." "Enough," his partner said. "You're off duty now. Go back to the station." Officer Rick stepped back, still staring at Maria. The second officer called for an ambulance. Maria was helped into the back of the van, and the door closed. The crowd was silent. Some people were crying. Some still held their phones, not knowing whether to keep recording or not. "She's just a poor old woman," one lady said softly. But another man replied, "Did you hear what she said? You don't know who I am, but you will." That's strange, isn't it? And so the crowd whispered. Questions filled the air. Who was this woman? Why did a police officer attack her? What secret was she hiding? The video of the beating went viral within hours. It was shared on every platform: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. People around the world were shocked and angry. "Police brutality against the elderly," the headlines screamed. But others asked, "Who is Maria Thomas? Why did the officer say he had seen her before?" The mystery began. In a quiet hospital room later that night, Maria lay on the bed. Her face was bruised and her hands were wrapped in bandages. A nurse walked in and smiled kindly. "You're safe now?" she said. Maria nodded. "Thank you." The nurse was about to leave, but then she noticed something strange. Maria was holding a small, old photograph in her hand. She was looking at it like it was the most important thing in the world. In the photo, there were 3 people, 2 men in police uniforms, and a young woman standing between them. The nurse asked gently, "Who are they?" Maria looked up, her voice soft. "Ghosts from the past." Outside the hospital, a black car was parked. A man in a dark suit sat inside, watching the building. He held a phone to his ear. "She's back," he said. "After all these years?" "She came back." The voice on the other end said, "We need to handle this before the truth comes out." The man nodded. "I'll take care of it." He drove off into the night. And so, the story had just begun. A public beating, a mysterious woman, a young officer with a connection he didn't understand, and a past that refused to stay hidden. What was the truth Maria was hiding? Why did her return scare powerful people? The answers were buried deep in the past, but now the past was knocking, and someone was going to pay. The sun had not yet risen when the video took over the internet. It started on a small local news page. The title was clear and shocking: "Old Woman Beaten by Police in Public, Crowd Watches in Silence." Within minutes, people began sharing it everywhere. On social media, the video spread like fire. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, everyone was talking about the same thing. Some people cried while watching it. Others got angry. Thousands commented, "She didn't do anything wrong. Why didn't anyone stop him? Who is this lady?" But the truth was, no one knew who she really was. The video showed her face clearly. An old woman in pain, holding her bag, whispering strange words. She didn't fight. She didn't shout. Yet she said something that left everyone thinking, "You don't know who I am, but you will." What did that mean? In the police department, things were getting out of control. Officer Rick sat alone in a room watching the same video again and again. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He had been suspended the same night. The higher officers were angry. They told him to stay quiet and not speak to the press. But Rick couldn't stop thinking about the old woman. "I've seen her before," he whispered to himself. But where? He opened his drawer and pulled out an old box. Inside were newspaper clippings, a few medals, and a photo album. He turned the pages slowly. Suddenly he stopped. There she was, a black and white photo from over 20 years ago. In the picture, his father, another officer, and a young woman who looked just like Maria, but younger, stronger, wearing a police badge. "It's her," he said. "But how is that possible?" Back in the hospital, Maria lay in bed. Her face was still bruised, but her eyes were calm. The nurse entered with a tray of food, but Maria didn't touch it. She was thinking. She knew what was happening outside. She had seen the news. She had heard the whispers. She had expected this. Suddenly, the door opened quietly. A man in a black coat stepped in. He looked around carefully before speaking. "Maria," he said softly. She turned to him and gave a small smile. "You came." "I had to," the man replied. "They're digging into your past." Maria nodded. "Let them. The truth is already on its way." The man handed her a small envelope. "It's all in here," he said. "The papers, the names, the records. But be careful. They'll try to stop you." Maria held the envelope tightly. Her hands were weak, but her heart was strong. "I've waited 25 years for this," she said. "I won't stop now." The man gave her one last look and left. Meanwhile, the media was in a frenzy. Reporters rushed to the hospital trying to get a comment from Maria, but the police had blocked them from entering. Everyone wanted to know, who was she? Why did she carry herself with so much quiet strength? Why didn't she fight back or scream? One reporter, Sarah James, was not like the others. She didn't want headlines. She wanted the truth. She had been watching the video all night, noticing small details others missed. The way Maria looked at Officer Rick, the strange sentence she said, the notebook that fell from her bag. Sarah searched through old news articles, digging deep into archives. Then she found something, an old case, almost forgotten. 1999. Internal police investigation. A female detective named Maria Thomas. Young, brave, smart. She had tried to expose a group of corrupt officers, but the case was closed suddenly. No explanation. No trace of her after that. The file ended with one line. Maria Thomas, status, missing. Sarah sat back, shocked. She disappeared. And now she's back? Back on social media, new theories filled the comments. She's a spy. She used to be in the army. Maybe she's the officer's mother? She was framed years ago, but no one knew the truth. Not yet. At the police station, Officer Rick stared at the photo again. His father was smiling in the picture, shaking hands with Maria. They had worked together. He remembered hearing about a woman who left the force years ago. But he never thought it was her. He stood up quickly. He had to know more. He went to the records room and asked for files from 1999, but the officer at the desk looked nervous. "Those are restricted," he said. Rick showed his badge. "I need them, now." After a long pause, the man handed him a dusty file. Rick opened it and began to read. As he read each page, his eyes grew wider. Fraud, bribery, abuse of power, a list of names. Most of them were officers, and at the end, a report by Maria Thomas. She had discovered everything. She had tried to stop them, and then she vanished. Rick leaned back in his chair. He couldn't believe it. His father's name was on the list. His own father was part of the corruption. He covered his face with his hands. "What have I done?" he whispered. The hospital was quiet. Outside, the wind blew softly. The city that once ignored an old woman was now watching her every move. Inside room 207, Maria Thomas sat in silence. Her face was calm, but her heart was racing. She had not eaten much since arriving. She didn't trust anyone here, not even the smiling nurse who brought her tea. Maria had learned long ago, kindness could be a mask. She held the small envelope tightly. Inside were copies of old case files, proof of what she had tried to do, many years ago. It was all still there. The corruption, the lies, the names. But this time, she wouldn't run. She had come back to finish what she started. It was almost midnight when the door opened. A tall man in a dark coat stepped in quietly. He wore glasses and his face looked tired but alert. Maria looked up and nodded slowly. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. "I had no choice," the man replied. "It's already out. Everyone is asking questions." "Good," Maria said. "It's time they found the answers." The man sat beside her. His name was Daniel Graves, once a journalist, now a ghost in the world of truth. Years ago, he and Maria had worked together on a secret case, a case that nearly got both of them killed. "You were right to hide," Daniel said. "They would have destroyed you." "I didn't hide," Maria replied. "I waited." She handed him the envelope. "Make sure the truth comes out," she said. Daniel looked inside. He recognized the documents immediately. Police reports, financial records, hidden payments, all the proof they needed. His eyes fell on a photo. A group of officers, some now retired, some still in power, and in the middle of them, a young officer named Victor Rickson. Daniel's voice dropped. "Rickson. That's Officer Rick's father, isn't it?" Maria nodded. "Yes, and that's why I didn't fight back. I saw his eyes. He's his father's son, but also not." Daniel sighed. "This is dangerous, Maria. If the wrong people find out you're alive, They already know, Maria said. At that same moment, in a dark room across the city, someone else was watching. A man in a suit stood in front of a large screen. On it was paused video footage of the hospital hallway. "Room 207, he said to the phone. "She's not alone," the voice on the other end asked. "Is it Graves?" "Yes. Handle it." The man nodded. "It will be done. Back in the hospital." Maria looked out the window. Her voice was soft. "Do you know what hurts the most, Daniel?" He didn't answer. He waited. Maria continued. "I gave everything to the force, my youth, my strength. I believed in justice." "You still do," Daniel said. Maria smiled. "Yes, that's why I came back. I thought I could die in peace, but then I saw the news. The same crimes, the same people, and a new generation, covering it up." She turned to Daniel, her eyes sharp. "But now the world is watching. They won't be able to hide this." Daniel stood up and placed the envelope inside his coat. "I'll take this to Sarah James," he said. "She's smart. She's brave. She can help." Maria nodded. "Good. She reminds me of myself." Outside the hospital, Sarah James was still digging. She had spoken to 3 retired officers that day. None of them wanted to talk about Maria. One of them even slammed the door in her face. Something big was buried, and someone powerful wanted it to stay that way. Sarah looked at the old case files again. She had printed everything she found. The name Victor Rickson kept appearing, and beside it, initials, M.T. Maria Thomas. She tried to stop him, Sarah whispered, but they silenced her. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a private number. "Come. Alone. Midnight. East Parking. I have something for you. DG." Sarah's eyes widened. Daniel Graves, the missing journalist? She grabbed her coat and left at once. Meanwhile, Officer Rick sat in his apartment, still shocked. The old files had changed everything he believed. His father, the man he had looked up to, was not a hero. He was a criminal in uniform. And the woman he had hurt, she was the one trying to stop it all. He remembered her words. "You don't know who I am, but you will." Now he did know, and he hated himself. Rick picked up his phone and called the hospital. "I want to speak to Maria Thomas," he told the nurse. "Sorry," the nurse replied. "She's resting. No visitors tonight." Rick's voice was firm. "Please, tell her Officer Rick wants to apologize." There was a pause. Then the nurse replied, "I'll tell her." Rick hung up and stared at the wall. He had been part of something terrible. But could he fix it? Back at the hospital, Maria received the message from the nurse. She closed her eyes and whispered, "It's starting. One by one. They're waking up." Just then, her room phone rang. She picked it up. A voice said only one thing. "They're coming for you tonight." Then the line went dead. Maria didn't panic. She stood slowly, walked to the closet, and pulled out a second envelope. It was thicker, heavier. She had prepared for this. Maria looked at the photo on her bedside table. 3 officers from the past, and she said quietly, "You buried me once. Let's see if you can do it again." Officer Rick sat alone in his apartment. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. Each second felt heavy. His police uniform lay folded on the chair. For the first time in years, he didn't want to wear it. He had always believed in law, in justice, in his badge, but now everything felt like a lie. The old woman, Maria Thomas, wasn't just a stranger. She had worked with his father. She had tried to uncover the truth. And he had thrown her to the ground in front of the whole world. He remembered her face clearly. Not angry, not scared, just disappointed. And her words kept echoing in his head. "You don't know who I am, but you will." Now he knew, and the guilt was eating him alive. Rick stood up and opened the box of old family photos. He had never looked at them this way before. His father, Victor Rickson, always wore his uniform with pride. He told stories about bravery, justice, and protecting the people. But the files Rick had read said something else. Money stolen, innocent people threatened, officers paid to stay quiet, and Maria, the only one who tried to stop them. The file also showed something darker. When Maria tried to report everything, the case disappeared, and so did she. Rick picked up a photo of himself as a boy, standing between his father and another officer. He turned it over. Written on the back in faded ink, "Truth always returns." Rick's hands shook. He realized something. This photo wasn't taken by his mother. It was signed with initials, M.T. Maria Thomas. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Maria sat in her bed, her eyes watching the door. She was expecting someone. She had already received the warning. "They're coming tonight." But she wasn't afraid. She had faced worse before. She had been betrayed by friends, silenced by those she trusted. But now the world was watching. This time they couldn't bury the truth so easily. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Wasn't a nurse. It was Officer Rick. He stepped in slowly, without his uniform. He looked nervous, ashamed. "May I come in?" he asked. Maria nodded. "You already did once." Rick lowered his head. "I didn't know who you were." She looked at him for a long time. "Now you do?" "Yes," Rick said. "I read everything. I saw the files. My father, he was part of it." Maria's eyes didn't move. "And what do you feel?" Rick sat on the chair beside her. His voice was shaky. "I feel sick. I believed in him. I wanted to be like him. But now, I don't even know who I am anymore." Maria stayed quiet. Rick continued, "I hurt you, and I humiliated you in public. The world saw it, and I deserve their anger." Maria's voice was soft but strong. "You did more than hurt me. You woke the truth." Rick looked up. She continued, "If you hadn't stopped me, the world wouldn't be asking questions. You were cruel, but you lit the fire." He nodded slowly. "I want to help now. I want to fix what my father broke." Maria's eyes studied him. "You can't change the past," she said, "but you can choose what you do next." Rick took out a USB drive from his pocket. "I copied everything from the station's archive, the original files, the recordings, all of it. I'll give them to the press, or anyone you trust." Maria reached out and took it gently. "Thank you," she said. "But once you do this, your life will change. They will come after you too." Rick gave a sad smile. "I think they already are." Outside, in the hospital parking lot, a black van was waiting. Inside were two men in black coats, watching the security feed on a tablet. "He's inside," one of them said, "with her." The other one pulled out a silencer pistol. "Orders?" The first man replied, "Wait until he leaves, then finish it." Back in the room, Maria looked at Rick. "You're brave," she said. "I'm late," he replied, "but I'm ready now." Maria handed him a second envelope, her backup documents. "Give these to the journalist Sarah James. She's close to the truth." Rick nodded. He stood and paused at the door. "One question," he asked. "Why did you come back now?" Maria looked toward the window. "I saw something on the news. A young woman beaten in the street by corrupt cops. And I saw myself in her eyes. I knew then, if I stayed silent, I'd die with regret." Rick stepped out quietly, and Maria whispered, "You're not your father's shadow, Rick. Be better." Downstairs, Rick walked through the empty hall toward the exit. But he didn't know he was being followed. The two men from the van entered the hospital behind him, silently, carefully. One of them reached into his coat, just as Rick stepped out into the night. The hospital hallway was silent again, but something was different now. Danger had entered through the back door, and it was dressed in black. Two men, faces half hidden by caps, walked with quiet steps. They didn't speak. They didn't look around. They moved like shadows, fast, focused, cold. One of them held a phone in his hand. A message blinked on the screen. Target, Maria Thomas. Make it look like natural death. No mistakes. They reached the elevator and pressed the button. Room 207 was just 2 floors away. At the same time, Rick stepped into the parking lot. He looked over his shoulder once, feeling uneasy. A strange chill ran through his body, like someone was watching him, but he saw nothing. He got into his car and drove off, unaware that 2 killers had entered the building he just left. Inside his pocket, the USB drive and Maria's envelope rested together. Truth, evidence, names, crimes. Rick knew he had one job now: get this to Sarah James, the only reporter brave enough to tell the full story. Upstairs, Maria sat in bed, staring at the ceiling. She felt it, a shift in the air. Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. She had lived in hiding for so long that her body learned to sense danger before it even arrived. Then she heard it. Footsteps, too heavy for nurses, too slow for doctors. Not hurried, not casual, trained. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small pepper spray bottle. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maria took a deep breath. "I'm not afraid this time," she whispered. The elevator doors opened. The 2 men stepped out. They checked the hallway. No nurses, no cameras working. Room 207 was on the left. The taller man pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. "This won't take long," he whispered. They walked to the door and froze. The door was open. The bed empty. Maria was hiding behind the curtain beside the window. She had left a pillow under the blanket to fool them. Her breathing was slow and quiet, but her mind was sharp. She watched one of the men enter the room. The other stayed by the door. B. "Careful," he whispered. "She's not just some old lady." Maria waited. Then she moved. She grabbed the curtain and pulled it hard, wrapping it around the man with the syringe. He dropped the needle and stumbled back. Maria sprayed him in, the eyes with pepper spray. He screamed in pain. The second man rushed forward, pulling out a knife. But Maria grabbed the metal tray from the table and smashed it into his face. He fell to the ground, bleeding from his nose. She ran. Down the hallway, alarms began to ring. A nurse saw Maria running and called security. The 2 attackers tried to follow her, but the noise had drawn attention. One of the doctors blocked their way. "What's going on here?" The attackers turned and ran in the opposite direction. They took the stairs, disappearing into the night. Maria collapsed near the nurse's station. She was shaking, but alive. That night, the hospital became a crime scene. Police officers arrived. Reporters stood outside trying to get answers. But the truth hadn't come out yet. Only Sarah James was close enough to see it. Across the city, Rick met Sarah in an underground parking lot. She stood beside her car, holding a flashlight. "Did you bring it?" she asked. Rick handed her the envelope and USB. "I got it from her. Maria Thomas. She's alive. She has proof." Sarah opened the envelope. Her eyes widened. Names of officers, money transfers, court documents, photos, secret recordings. "This is huge," she whispered. "This could bring the whole system down." Rick nodded. "That's why they'll try to stop you." Sarah looked up. "They already tried to kill her." Rick's face turned pale. "What?" "She was attacked at the hospital. 2 men, trained. She barely escaped." Rick clenched his fists. "I should have stayed. I could have protected her." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're protecting her now, by helping the truth come out." Back at the hospital, Maria was placed in a safer room under police guard. But she knew that wouldn't stop them forever. They're scared, she whispered to herself, because now the story is alive. In a dark office somewhere in the city, a man watched the news on mute. He was older now, gray hair, cold eyes, sitting behind a desk filled with secrets. He was once known as Captain Victor Rickson, father of Officer Rick, and he was still powerful. "She's back," he said softly. "And she's not hiding anymore." He picked up the phone. "Send the cleaner. We're burning this story before it spreads." Officer Rick sat alone in his old childhood home. The silence was loud. Everything inside the house still looked the same. The family photos on the wall, the leather couch, the medals in the glass cabinet. It was all frozen in time. But now, it felt fake. Rick stared at a photo of his father in uniform, holding a medal. He had grown up believing his father was a hero, strong, brave, honest, but now, all those stories sounded like fairy tales. He remembered Maria's voice again. "Your father didn't just wear the badge, he used it to hide his crimes." Rick picked up the old photo and turned it over. Faded handwriting read, "Justice, no matter the cost." The irony hit him hard. That morning, Rick had made a decision. He needed to confront the truth, not just in files and papers, but from the man himself, his father, Victor Rickson, retired, respected, untouchable. But Rick had questions, and he wanted real answers. Rick drove out of the city to the house on the hill where his father lived. The gates opened slowly. The security camera followed him as he walked up the stone path. He knocked once. The door opened. There he was, Captain Victor Rickson, older now, walking with a cane, but still sharp, still in control. "Rick," he said calmly. "I didn't expect you today." Rick didn't smile. "We need to talk." Alone, Victor stepped aside. "Come in." Inside the house, everything was clean, organized, cold. They sat across from each other in the study. Books lined the walls. A small fire burned in the corner. Rick took a deep breath. "I know what you did," he said. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Be clear, son." "I've seen the files. I've read the reports. You were part of something dirty, you and others, and Maria Thomas. She tried to stop it." Victor leaned back, not surprised. "And what will you do with this information?" Rick's hands clenched. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Victor's voice was calm. "Because the truth is dangerous, and you were just a boy. You needed a father to believe in." "That wasn't truth," Rick said. "That was a lie." Victor stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out. "You think the world is simple," he said. "Good and bad, right and wrong. But it's not. Sometimes we had to make hard choices to survive. Choices that ruined lives," Rick said, standing too. "You destroyed people, silenced them. You tried to silence Maria." Victor turned sharply. "She was a threat. She didn't understand how things worked. She wanted to bring down the entire department. I protected what mattered." "No," Rick said firmly. "You protected yourself." There was a long pause. Then Victor spoke in a low, cold voice. "She should have stayed hidden." Rick's heart dropped. So it was true. Everything Maria had said. Everything he had feared. Rick walked out of the house in silence. His father didn't stop him. But before Rick reached his car, Victor called out, "You still wear the badge. Don't." "You?" Rick turned. "Not for long. Not like this." Victor said one last thing. "The badge doesn't protect you anymore. Be careful, son." Later that night, Rick met with Sarah James again in a quiet cafe. He looked tired, shaken. "I talked to him," Rick said. Sarah leaned forward. "And?" He didn't deny anything, Rick replied. He called it survival. Sarah frowned. It's worse than I thought. Rick handed her a notebook. I wrote down everything he said. We need to move fast. Before they try again? Sarah nodded. I've already sent a part of the story to my editor. If anything happens to us, it still gets published. Rick looked around nervously. They'll come after you. You know that, right? Sarah smiled weakly. They already are. Meanwhile, in a dark underground office, Victor Rickson spoke with a shadowy figure. The files are leaking, Victor said. My son is involved. The man in the shadows nodded. We warned you. Now we clean it up. Victor looked away. Don't hurt him. The man didn't answer. He just smiled. Back at the hospital, Maria watched the news on the small TV. Journalist Sarah James investigating police corruption. More details coming soon. She smiled faintly. It had begun. But outside her window, a red laser dot appeared on the wall, and the shadows were moving again. The hospital was quiet. Too quiet. Maria sat in her room reading through a file. Her hands were still bruised, her ribs still sore, but her mind was sharp. She had waited years for this moment. Now the truth was finally spreading. But she also knew what came next. They would try to end it, end her. Across the city, Sarah James sat at her computer, uploading the final parts of the story. Documents, audio, photos. Everything was ready. Her phone buzzed. Text from Rick. Stay. Alert. They're watching all of us now. Sarah looked at the window. The curtains were closed. Still, she felt exposed. She knew once the full report went live, she couldn't hide anymore. But she pressed upload. The screen blinked. Sending. To editor. Success. Sarah leaned back, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, Officer Rick was on his way back to the hospital. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming. He kept checking his rearview mirror. Then, he saw it. A black motorcycle. Following him, helmet. No license plate. Rick made 3 turns. The bike followed each one. Back at the hospital, a man dressed in a maintenance uniform stepped out of the elevator. He wheeled a cleaning cart down the hallway. No one paid attention, but under the cart was a black case. Inside it, a silenced rifle. The man stopped outside room 207. Maria's room. He took out a tablet and checked the feed from a hidden camera. Maria was alone, sitting up. Reading. The target was still. He slowly opened the case, pulled out the rifle, and attached the silencer. Rick was speeding now. He couldn't lose the biker. The man pulled up closer beside him. Suddenly, he raised his hand, holding a gun. Rick swerved. Bang! The shot shattered his window. Rick lost control for a second, but quickly regained it. He slammed the brakes, and the biker flew ahead. Rick pulled out his own gun and fired once. The bike crashed, but Rick didn't stop. He kept going. He had. One mission, save Maria. In the hospital, the shooter sat up by the window. He looked through the rifle scope. Red dot aimed at Maria's chest. He was calm, trained, ready. Finger on the trigger. Then, the door slammed open. Drop it! Officer Rick. Gun drawn, eyes burning. The shooter spun around to fire, but Rick was faster. Bang! The shooter dropped, bleeding as Rick rushed to Maria. You okay? He asked, breathing hard. Maria nodded, shaken. You came back. Rick smiled. I promised I would. Minutes later, the hospital was full of police. For once, the good ones. The shooter was arrested, badly wounded. His ID was fake, but one name kept coming up. Victor Rickson. Rick's father. Rick walked out of the hospital, looking up at the sky. It was dark, but a few stars had appeared. He called Sarah. It's time, he said. Sarah's voice was steady. The story drops in the morning. Rick looked back at the hospital. They tried to kill her tonight. There was silence. Then Sarah said, We hit them first thing tomorrow, All of it. Rick nodded. No more shadows. In a secret location, Victor Rickson watched the security footage of the failed hit. He stood alone, watching his son save the woman he once tried to silence. His hand trembled slightly. "They've chosen sides," he whispered. Then he picked up a burner phone. "Begin the final step," he said. And the line went dead. The morning sun rose slowly over the city. Golden light touched the rooftops, the streets, the hospitals, and even the cold, gray office where once dark secrets had lived. But today was different. Today, truth was coming. Sarah James sat in her studio, her hands shaking slightly as she stared at the screen. She had double-checked everything: documents, videos, witness statements, Maria's files, and Rick's notes. At 7 a.m. sharp, she pressed "Publish to all platforms." The story went live. The headline read, "Hidden for 20 years, corruption, cover-ups, and the brave woman who survived it all." Within minutes, it exploded. Phones started ringing, social media filled with comments, news channels picked it up, radio stations read her words live, and the name Maria Thomas was on everyone's lips. At the hospital, Maria sat by the window. Young nurse came in, holding a phone. "Ma'am, you're everywhere," she said with wide eyes. "People are calling you a hero." Maria didn't smile. She just whispered, "I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted the truth to live." The nurse nodded, wiping a tear from her eye. In the police headquarters, chaos broke out. Files were opened. Old cases were rechecked. Names that were once protected began to fall. Corrupt officers were arrested. Former victims came forward, one by one. The walls began to break. Victor Rickson watched the news in silence. His hands trembled. His name was mentioned. His face was shown. His crimes were exposed. The power he had built for decades was falling apart. He poured himself a drink, staring at the television. Then he made one final call. To Rick. Rick answered, his voice cold. "What do you want?" Victor sighed. "You destroyed everything." "No," Rick replied. "You destroyed it. I just let the world see." There was silence. Then Victor spoke one last time. "I don't regret protecting my men, but I do regret losing my son." Rick didn't answer. He just ended the call. Later that day, Rick and Sarah held a press conference. Maria, now walking with a cane, joined them. She stood in front of cameras, her voice soft but strong. "For years I was silent. They beat me. They buried me in fear. But I lived. And now, the truth lives." "Two!" Reporters clapped. The crowd watching from screens at home felt her pain and her courage. That evening, candles were lit across the city, not for mourning, but for hope. People gathered in parks, outside police stations, and in front of their homes. They held candles for justice, for truth, and for Maria Thomas, the woman who refused to stay silent. 1 week later, Rick turned in his badge. He walked out of the station for the last time. He wasn't a cop anymore, but he had done what few could. He broke the silence, even when it meant breaking his own family. Sarah stood waiting outside. "You ready for what's next?" she asked. Rick nodded. "Yeah, this time, we fight from the outside." As they walked away, Maria sat on a bench nearby, watching them. She smiled. Not because it was over, but because a new beginning had started.